Okay, so it's great to have you here, Bahar. I have been really looking forward to hearing about All Water Has a Perfect Memory and talking with you more about your work in general and waterways, water justice issues, and memory. And I will let you take over. Thanks.
Sure, I'm just really excited to talk with you today. It's kind of like rare these days to get truly excited because I think it's a really labor intensive, meaningful project that you're doing, and I know how much you are also like really value the research part of the work rather the final product, which is odd for me as like people think like because I'm a painter, I'm a filmmaker, so the final product always like is just more important. But for me personally, I think like that kind of final product is really like secondary for me. I see every project is the journey that you can take on, the way that you learn and you understand things. And usually, I used to work only in isolation in my studio as a painter for many years, and then as a filmmaker. But like recently, for the last couple of years, I radically switched to something that I would like to call it a communal research-based work. And I really value the knowledge of the community and other people and our own history and other people's ancestral knowledge and all these. So um, before we start about this project that it's called All Water Has a Perfect Memory, it was at the Wayfield, and I think originally that's why you approached me. I thought like maybe it's interesting to share with you a little bit about my relationship with water in general, because when I think about water, I think about a very harsh drought and a very lush oasis at the same time. So, and I tell you like where this paradoxical feeling come from in a moment. I come from Iran and the country of gardens and poetry, of course, with lots of not very poetic issues and conflict at the present time for water issues. So let's go to the first slide here that I brought, particularly that you can see like the landscape of Iran. And this is until we go back to the ancient time when the Iranian plateau entered the dry period, maybe some I don't know, 4,000 years ago, and its aridness culminated later in the wake of climate change. The ancient inhabitants turned to a genius technique which enabled them to stay for thousands of years. That system of tunneling water from underground, we call it qanat with Q-A-N-A-T, which is basically is the first water irrigation system in the world. Qanat is a gently sloping subterranean canal which taps the water-bearing zone at a higher elevation than cultivated lands. At a glance, Qanat is nothing but a horizontal tunnel. We're talking about like before pumping and those kind of tools. We're talking about like a very primitive, ingenious way. To digging this tunnel requires a variety of sciences and technologies that left from our ancestors, of course. And this extended structure sometimes reaches tens of miles. Like, Anat passes through geological formations and faces different conditions and obstacles. So the Arab masters were like the god of the land, and their effort to solve these problems led to the accumulating of knowledge in terms of Arab construction over times, which has been handed down only from generation to generation and father to sons. So it is like a very familial um, profession. Anat is one of the most complicated traditional technologies which require knowledge on nature ranging from groundwater to management, which really interests me. and it links to today. Um, so this picture is one of my favorite picture that I think it shows like it's the same area. It just shows those traces are the traces of water that it comes from underneath, and in the middle it's just that oasis that they managed to make the village or the garden. You may know that Persian gardens are the um, not only like the point of the romance in in the history of Europe and the point of Orientalism, but also it's just really it was like a little paradise. And um, what I want to say here, this is not like only just a summary of the nature or distribution of Hanas. It seems like it's like a more extensive journey through the philosophy, a style of living, methods and tools. Um, it's in that way that they could make a little paradise or oasis in the middle of harshness. So this beautiful picture makes me feel grounded, makes me think about ancestral struggle, but also like intricate wisdom. So on a closer view to the same uh, garden, we go closer. So here it is the walled oasis, of course, because of the protecting from the sand and harsh winds. Um, of very symmetrically arranged rectangular pools, interconnected waterways above and below ground, exquisite pavilions and lush plantings that I can talk about it for hours of hours in this is seminar, so stop me. And this garden was built on 1830. So the reason that I tell you is I want to talk about it later. And this picture I took it a couple of years ago. So still the water from the Ranat um, is working or was working. We're talking about the Ranat system that's going back to like centuries back. In 2014, just to just a little bit like an overview, there have existed some 35,000 active qanats running all over Iran, discharging about like something like I don't know, I think like 7 billion cubic meters groundwater a year. And this picture is from a couple of years ago, and I don't want to get to politics and makes me like very nervous and frustrated, but it's before the sanctions hit the even water infrastructures in Iran and sanctions with America, and we're talking about like another issue here. But so that's how like water is this my paradoxical relationship with water. So let's get back to New York. And when I got invited to the Wave Hill for the site visit to make a site responsive public art, the first thing, of course, that captivates you is the mesmerizing view of Hudson River when you go to the Wave Hill. It's just like really captivating with Palisade view, and it's just immediately you artist or non-artist, you just you're drawn there and you want to do something. But of course, my response was more on the underground water system within the garden's ecosystem and beyond. As I told you, and I repeat again, my knowledge system is navigated by the traditional Qanat. Okay? So in traditional Qanat, know-how encompasses a wide range of indigenous knowledge from geometry to botany. In fact, if there would not be interaction and cooperation between different fields of sciences, no qanat would come into existence. At the beginning of construction of a qanat, the workers should know about the plant species and the desert and the relationship with groundwater in order to design it to best spot to dig the first well, which we call it mother well. To do so, they should also be knowledgeable on geological stratification to better estimate the depth of the bedrock and the sediment thickness. And so I kind of like knew that I wanted to connect all these together because I strongly believe that there is a very intricate interconnectivity between all these ecosystem of the world. And so I knew that this kind of like parallel history and stories in my mind, it definitely is kind of like interrelated in the to the Hudson River in the Wayville in the Bronx. It might not like at the beginning it looks like that, but I'm sure you as a research-based um, artist also like understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it
Uh,
seems. Oh, sorry. I'm
no,
gonna let
no,
you
go
talk.
ahead. No, no, please.
No, I mean, I guess I'm just thinking about the traditional knowledge that you're carrying with you, and I'm so curious about how it has sort of played out in this system in New York's waterways, which has been built only in the last couple of hundred years, and how they overlapped is sort of fascinating. I know that you know, for instance, that maybe some of the forms are similar. So.
Yeah, forms are similar. The way that you manage, you manipulate, you privatization, like many things, because we're talking about human being too. The way
Mhm.
that we ignore the indigenous wisdom and
Mhm.
indigenous people in any culture is the same. Like you forget like where you come from and what was like before that, and you kind of under the name of the progress you do things in the industrial time that it happened like in the Hudson River, very
Mhm.
obviously that how disrupted that. So yeah, so I started my research by very intensive walks taken with grateful staff and numerous workshops that we had with interns and students. I worked in parallel with two different focus groups to combine the creative kind of multifaceted initiative because we're talking about like the water system, the Hudson, and then I knew that the water is not coming like an abstract thing. It just comes with the species and the plants, and it comes in the ecosystem of the garden. If you make it like very localized, we're talking about erosion. Then we're talking about like native plants, and then how these all like interact with each other. And then we're
Mhm.
talking about like the Harlem River and Bronx River, and then how it just connects to the Hudson. So they were like so many complicated other tributes to this subject that I'm just so satisfied and so humbled that I had this group in the garden that they were my collaborators. They were like a brilliant, open minded, curious young people. So we had a regular weekly meeting with the group that is called ACES, ACES, which stands for Community and Environmental Stewards, with leadership of a great instructor, Madeline, who generously handed the whole, uh, all the interns and the whole facilities and the time and everything to me for the course of like
Oh,
5 to 6 months to work with these
wow.
people that we eventually, I mean, I tell you like how the research was working, but eventually they made their own zines inspired by their work, but like completely different than the way that they wanted to express this artistically too.
So it has all of these tendrils or these ways that it still kind of lives on in the world, even though the sculpture may or may not be there anymore. I'm not sure if it's
We talk
still
about
there. Okay.
that. Yeah, and the other active group, it was in the woodland. Like the garden has got like a kind of like half a mile woodland that it goes around, and it has got like this group of forest project interns that they call the WERM, Woodland Ecology Research Mentorship interns, who they work with the team of forest project with Barry Cogan, the amazing senior manager, as the core of the program. So they are the different group that they're working
Okay.
only on the woodland, and the ACEs they are in the like a art and community environmental project on
Okay.
the other side of the
Mhm.
garden. So it was really nice that it's also like I could connect them together, which traditionally they're not connecting because they have their own very labor intensive works in the woodland, and the other group has got like a very educational
Same.
program, and they're just busy. So this zine actually made them come
Oh,
together
that's
and
amazing.
talk with each other, which is another thing that it really made me happy. So in the workshops, I asked them to contribute ideas, research, art, and writing, everything, but focused on. We had like every workshop, we had like a theme that it was going through. Um,
Okay.
the very focal thing. So, and then, like for example, Worm is actively working on the erosion issue in the garden, and since their hands were practically on it as one of the project together, they came up with color coding with the erosion levels along the woodland. So they were just,
Oh,
for example, have like a dark blue for like a very heavy erosion. So and they are making all these bars with their hands, actually preventing the erosion. So it's also like an act of ownership uh, to that too, which was really nice. They were
that's so
doing
cool.
something with it, and while it was just like archiving it too. So uh,
Yeah.
just a parenthesis here that when I'm talking about a very intensive collaborative research, I'm also like a, a very um, uh, uh, like a very not very, but I'm an isolated painter anyway, so I need my very own time. So I do like a very extensive individual research walks. So I walked for more than 100 miles for
Oh my
this
God.
project, and the reason that I walk is actually I really I mean, by accident, I found out this another story, another time I tell you. But my brain works much more active and creative when I walk. And
Mm.
when I focus on one project and I go to the exact site to see the things, there are other things that unexpected and just make get my attention. That at the same time, it's just really important for the project versus like sitting behind my computer and doing the same project, doing the same research. So I realized that this walking research is the core of my studio practice actually. So of
Wow.
course I went to the source. I went to the Croton Aqueduct,
Okay.
and it started from there. And these pictures actually that you see is from a fascinating exhibition. I don't know if you saw it, that they had it there. There is a small gallery there that is called the Friends of Old Croton.
Mhm.
There's a group that they're managing that. So it was very rare that they have like this exhibition of the history of aqueduct, and I was just like I was obsessed with the shape of aqueduct, all the before uh, that and after that, and how they designed it, the engineers, like the whole thing. One of the interesting fact is by the 1830s, New York City had exhausted its own natural freshwater resources. So the 300,000 citizens voted in 1834 to approve an expansive and daring project to bring pure and wholesome water to the city through an aqueduct, 40 miles long, you know, for that forever changing the fortune of the city. And when I thinking about that date, it's somehow for me like it's always because I grew up somewhere else, so I have parallel histories in my
Mhm.
mind.
Mhm.
So at the same time that I'm just here, I'm just like, okay, what was going on in 1834 back in my own region? And that was the year that garden,
Interesting.
Shazde garden that I showed you, that they were building
That's so
that. So
interesting. Huh.
then it was just like a lot of overlap of thinking, like how how they eh, the accessibility of water is something, and then who manages that and who owns that,
Mhm.
and then how they protect it, who protects that. Is it army, is it like patron, is it like the king at that time in Iran? Is it like, and then I ended up all the way to 42nd Street Public uh, New York Library, that uh, I never noticed that the whole army was just like protecting that reservoir that now is the public library. So all these is just fascinating for me, that it's like interwoven in a way that's how like these this is like this is like the rivers, this is like a different branches, of things that they come together. And the reason that I walk and around the area and then I expand it is just because I can do it in my own pace and just contemplate of all these. And talking about the shape, let's just talk about that a little bit. I studied a lot with the geometrical shape that either contains or keep or move water in many cultures, and from the Renaissance before that, here before industrial time, indigenous people after, in Iran, like this is like I think like it's shape for me is very important. Um, and I have a feeling that when we're talking about like shape, we're talking about, oh, this is by the way, it's
So
put
interesting.
together like the Croton Aqueduct, and Kanat is going underground, and of
It's going
course
down from there.
aqueduct coming up, but like
Mhm.
at the same time it's a dynamic that we can talking about. And here is the first evidence that we have from canal system, from aerial views, of course, in the Pasargayet, around 600 BC, where the geologists and historians believe the first garden idea came to birth by Cyrus the Great,
Mhm.
which also it's, we can have like a seminar around it, but like it's also like brings to the uh, thought that, okay, so how it came to his mind, who was the person that could just really like rule everything with like, and this is like the repeating story, like we
Mhm.
still have the same thing when we're talking about like today. We're talking about like the problem of water in fleet, or like we're talking about privatization. Like it's always
Yeah.
about power of uh, who owns it, or who owns uh, the source, and
Mhm.
uh, and the ability to take over of the infrastructure too. So in that way, shape, it always just makes me like really think about like our habits, our customs, our rituals, our health,
Mhm.
how like in urban planning, in everything is about shape. Who makes or design these shapes in urban planning? In, so you
Same
can
people.
just uh, another thing that I'm very much interested in, the system of documenting and defining things, especially by the Europeans when we talk about in general in the West and in the East, and the first cartography. And uh, I also um, studied and grew up with the importance of ancient knowledge of orientation. Um, how it's important to position things in which
Mhm.
orientation. And then when I think about like today and the policy, like city policy, and as well as like zoning system, and how they can clash with your health and with how your being, like these all like things that I think about. In just there are many things that it needs a lot of time, but I just like go to the surface of
Mhm.
everything. So anything that you wanted to go deeper later, we can do. In one of the workshops that I held at the Wayfield, I started the conversation around personal and shared memories. Oh, and I wanted to tell you, like in the last slide, the top one at the left is my mother's house in the big complex, of course, and you can
Oh,
see
wow.
like that pool,
Yeah.
the blue one that is for irrigation, not for swimming, of course. So it's always important for me to stay centered and stay to something like really I know, not only I know, but also like it just makes you move, because you've touched it, it so with all your body cells.
Yeah.
So in my practice, and especially in the community practice, I always just really emphasize on the okay, you all uh, brilliant ecological interns here that you talk about like environmental things, and you have like very knowledgeable, all these things. But let's just talk about like your memories. Let's talk about last time that you swam. And we
Mhm.
started like that. And it was fascinating. I mean, I think that was the spike of my whole, was the middle of the research in terms of like length, after like
Yeah.
3 months. And I felt like it went like very slowly, because like young people also, they're shy. And but then they started to talk about like things that, it was very emotional. It was uh, we laughed. We also, it brought like tears to some eyes. It was about like their uh, themselves or grandmothers or some stories
Mhm.
that they heard. But it was a very transparent workshops that we continue doing that with other groups too, because I thought it's actually what is missed here, maybe in the modern time of us, and particularly in the West, is the missing part between knowledge and really like a personal feelings.
And
So we know
emotion.
everything, we know issues, we know, the Green Deal, we know like this and that, but we really don't get back to see like what was the last time that I had a glass of water and I really enjoyed. That's important. That
Mm.
I think is as important as like knowing like why the Hudson River is polluted. Like that's, I think it's the synergy of like doing activism, or like doing or being an aware citizen, or make or changing a policy.
Yeah.
It's
You
just
care
like
so much
both.
more about it when you think about its intimacies.
Yes, yeah, exactly, that intimacy is very important. So when we were just like so focused in Hudson River, and then when I asked like, okay, so what was your last time that you have something about Hudson, or did you do something or a memory? And then they started to talk about other rivers,
Mm.
and that was like really interesting for me, that to see like how this guy, for example, talking about Ohio River, and how he misses like swimming in that with his cousins, and these are like young people. We're not talking about like last generation that was used to do this and that. And to my really surprised that how they got open after a couple of workshops, when they felt maybe much more comfortable with each
Right.
other. They went to, more personal things. Like, for example, one guy just talked about like his family's journey through Rio Grande,
Mm.
and other people were just like, it was like a really nice interaction. And we came up to this idea that the ecosystem of waterways are connected, as we are connected. And from there, um, it's kind of like I was thinking also as an artist how to put things in an artistic way that it makes sense. So I felt like I have to get back to a structure or a form,
Mm.
a shape. So I introduced them the octagon shape, and as the significance of this shape in the architectural forms in ancient Greek history, to its
Mhm.
popularity in America in the 60s, which is very weird. We don't go there, and its critical relationship with preserving pure water in Persian garden culture. So the group picked it up and made their own personal research and imagination around this form. And the seed of making an octagonal pool representing the 8 contested rivers planted there in a very organic way.
Wow.
Yeah,
So they
which is,
really co-designed it with you. And that's something that you said you pretty much haven't done before. This was the first time kind of diverging this much from a studio practice.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's just like, uh, of course, like octagon is a very old shape. It's not like, but the whole thing about how we can contextualize it to make sense in such a way that it speak to completely somewhere that they didn't have that spiritual or uh, connection with that octagonal shape. I grew up with that, so I'm just living around it like it's my habit, you know. But like I was just so worried that how they can translate it, how I can introduce to them not as my story,
Mm.
because I knew that it's a shape that is. There, there is a strong reason that ancient ancestors they used it as preserving water, because of the geometry aspect of it and
Yeah.
the kind of like the angles that it makes. And they
Mm.
found out that it keeps the water longer and in the purest way. So they used it a lot in ancient Greek too for their buildings. But I didn't want to just translate this to them.
Mm.
I kind of like wanted them to find their own reason to pick up the shape, and that's requires some personal research, but also like imagination. They liked it, and I wanted also to get accepted by the community. I
Mm.
didn't want just to erect a sculpture in the middle of the wayfield just because I think it's interesting. So it was like the whole thing around it.
So at a certain point, did you tell them it's other meanings or?
Yes, and they brought like all these meaning of like the harmony, the eternity, stability, multicultural. Like they came up. I have like all the words that they wrote for me or just talked about. I filmed them. It was really interesting.
Mm.
Made it like more meaningful than the original octagon that it was in my mind. Anyway, then we decided that the focal point of the installation is an octagonal pole, and I mounted on plastic barrels for many reasons that might be very obvious to talk about it, and
No, please.
and suggesting a floating raft
Mm.
to be. Also, I like to just talk about it as like in case there is an emergency move to the river, we have a raft, so don't worry about it. Um, and we install it on the conifer slope. And it's very interesting talking about orientation and position and all these. So we spent a lot of time with these people on the. Actually, we got all the map of the water system and the storm system of underground of the Wayfield and the vicinity area. So they really just put the marks on the whole area that where is this system goes underground. So we just position the this sculpture in a way that is leads to the northern entry point to the woodland and sits above an underground drainage system that carries stormwater from 252nd Street. I don't know how much you're familiar with that
Mhm.
area that comes the water
Yeah.
comes, and so that's on the way of that in the woodland. So and I didn't bring like any pictures here because I thought we don't have that much time. But then also because you don't see the whole thing underneath, and this is just like on the map and on the way that is there you see some drainage, but I knew that like a regular audience that they come to the garden they don't get this. So
Mhm.
how you as an artist tackle this,
Mm.
i
Yeah.
I always like to talk about these artists like you, which I know that you don't have time right now, but we do it one day. But like for me it was really like I was just worried, not worried, but I was concerned. I was anxious. I didn't want just to have like all these research things in my mind. I wanted to have a manifestation. And I also knew that I can't have this manifestation as like a material because of security things and many other things that
Yeah.
is like goes to the rule of the making public art. So I decided to make ephemeral things, and I invited performers to come and make like some sort of like we had like dance performances that it was connected to the drainage, and it was absolutely fascinating to see like the families and people that they come to the garden to see like the glorious things that is just about like scenery and things, and then you put their head underneath the drainage and still you can make it in a way that is super interesting and beautiful that they never thought of that.
Oh
So
yeah, and it connects so obviously to the plant life above, and I think that that's like, important to continually point out because it's so often forgotten about.
yes, yeah. So we had different. So the group of the educational program, the family program, that it's in the garden, and they have like weekly family art program. They actually came up with kind of like our collaboration, that even if I'm not there, how they can just activate this idea with the workshop with the kids with 3 years old, 4 years old, that it just also like it's around this subject. And they did like many weeks of the art program weeks with the kids and with the families around this and around drainage. And then we had this I invited these musicians that come to the garden, and I'll tell you later that how they followed the uh, water trace and
Yeah.
they improvised together. Um, it's this group Afro Polka that I work with them, sometimes collaborate, and Magic Sheba from Afro Polka actually brought the artists, the musicians that they kind of like had the root of them goes back to these rivers. So they are improvised improvisation musicians. So
Mm.
that was also like another thing that um, it just happened. So let's just move on to other aspects of the project because, for example, so we said like the rafts has got 8 side, and these 8 side panels, oh, I decided to carve them and I'm not a carved person, so I actually call it I scratch them because I'm not like I don't know how to carve, but like I'm a painter, so I manage that. And I really wanted to somehow have like my hands in the work, so the pressure of my hands or like something. So I decided to carve, and these carves are based on the Werem and ACES research representations of Bayfield's native and non-native plants. The diversity of the botanicals, it includes what I call immigrant species and instead of like invasive species. And one way I wanted to bring up this, the nuances of subject between native and non-native, and how such a definitions are often slippery. So that was also like the subject of many of the workshops that we did with the horticulturalists too, which actually is it's a little interesting to have these discussions with the
And was that part of
institutions.
the zine work as well?
Yes.
Okay.
So another thing that I was thinking, I don't know if it's interesting, but I just say everything. Maybe you are interested in
Yeah.
that. But as a painter, I was thinking, okay, so what paint? I don't want just to paint it, and I don't want to keep it like as a wood thing. So through like all these journey of the research, I was thinking a lot about extraction, and the paint is actually eventually came from Iran, is lapis lazuli
Okay.
that the story that how it came from Iran is another story,
Yeah.
but like, but it came, and I used it, and I think for me, it was another layer of work. Either even if it's just like an underneath layer, but I think it's addressing extraction locally and globally, which is a big issue. And it's also like throughout all these research, collaborative research, when we were talking about Hudson industrial history, we're talking about PCBs, industrial solvents, waste diesel, iron manufacturing, making, quarrying, lumbering, and then forget about like ice factory and other 19th century industries, like like private use of, and it's also like General Electrics and Con
Yeah.
Ed, like it just goes on and on, that how this extraction change again, that not only the ecosystem is disruption, it's associated with disruption, and then eventually the environmental justice. So it it was a small gesture for me to use another source, mine source, like lapis lazuli, that it comes from another part of the world, but it's got the same issue.
Yeah, and I feel like you must have thought about that in terms of all the materials in a way. I'm curious
Yeah,
about that.
it is also, I don't know, I read somewhere at some point that Terrytown residents used to say that they could look at the river and tell what color the big General Motors plant was painting the
Oh,
vehicle that day. So that
wow.
like stuck with me as a painter. Because like it was, I was like, okay, this has to be blue. Um, then a little bit about like shifting to the glue and another material, as you say. The the pool's interior is surfaced with tiles. That's soon I realized nothing should be bought as a new thing. So I sourced it from construction projects around the New York, and I decided to work on the tiles actually because I'm not a tiler, and I knew that if I want to, I can handle it somehow. But again, I was just thinking, okay, if the research process went through with the young educational program people, why not to bring a tiler that knows his work well, and not to treat him or the team as like a fabricator, but as the um, not designers, but like as the makers of.
Mhm.
And in the process, I really wanted to have like some sort of relationship with whoever he is. So I'm just very lucky that I knew a friend who was working with a great uh, amazing, like a Thai person from Ecuador, Cesar Ramirez, who is this guy, that I worked with him, and I'm so glad that he turned the project to the whole familial project. So he brought like his family, and uh, we were just talking about the same things in a different language while we were working on the tiling, and we were deciding about like, and it was actually a very it's hard it was harder than I expected, because when you buy tiles you know what kind you have, but when you bring like a tons of tiles, that they are, some of them they're just even broken or chipped, or they're not like matched, or it's just like there, first you have to sort them out, then you have to think like how,
Right.
what, like. So it was a real improvisation, and it was truly enjoyable, although like at some points I was terrified at how it looks like, but I had to trust.
Yeah.
So we were talking on the way about many things also. um,
I think what's exciting about that is, I mean, you're forced out of your comfort zone, maybe your aesthetic comfort zone, and you are like willing to be surprised and at the same time compromise in this way that's
Mary, that is something that my sister and my mother really like. Why you do that? Don't do that to yourself. And because they are the first-hand people that they see like what I go through. But I somehow think like if I want to make a project, I have to learn something new about it.
the same. Yes.
If I make something that I already know, or it's just like everything is solved, then I'm like, so what's the reason to add to this world another thing? Yeah, like it's all
Yeah.
about like how we make it. So it was it was very interesting journey, and none of these materials I worked before, none of these people I was comfortable to bring like a broad aspect of sometimes not comfortable subjects with
Hmm.
them. And also in this particular project, this is the underscoring the kind of like time consuming and intensive labor required to construct works in Thai. So that this labor has not always been voluntary reflects the history of it was like a history of privilege and
Hmm.
exploitation. So uh, I really wanted to kind of like reverse this with like bringing him and his family as the voice of the work, and just give them like that was that work. I think we work with dignity.
Hmm.
It wasn't about the design. It was about if this is a raft, a respectful vessel, that it's a kind of a survival technique, but it's also like how you get out of the situation in terms of let's think about raft. Let's think about climate exile. Let's think about all these fleeing people from different places. How much time, labor, love, attention, how much things you can live with that thing, knowing that it's gonna not last or not even take you to the other side.
You don't
So
know, so.
yes. So that yeah, that was the story of tiles.
So
Um,
they taught you tiling. Have you done it again? Do you think you will?
I did. I
After this
didn't
one?
bring. Yes, I went to Pakistan,
Oh wow.
another challenge, and completely worked with a different community. With I know the culture and the history, but the language barrier. Also, I'm not local, so I am very, very humble that I had the chance to do it. I did it with the tile artisans of the city of Lahore, and I also worked with the water engineers in the water department of Lahore. So it was completely another story of water and controlling and infrastructure. And we also over there, we're not talking only about river, it was about Ravi River. We're talking about transnational river that two countries they are actually in conflict because of that, and the whole Kashmir conflict comes out of it. So it was very sensitive subject, and it
Mhm.
was a risk for me to come, although I'm Iranian, but coming from America and initiate this. Uh, in the matter of like then when you travel, it's just 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Although I just traveled in two trips, uh, but I was really cautious that how to completely forget about my authorship and my being a contemporary artist and put like other things on the first priority, which which I'm glad that I worked with Cesar at the beginning, because it seems like he made me ready for that project. And Yeah, I was more comfortable when I got there. I exactly knew where and how I should get the tiles, and like it was interesting. Yeah, yeah. So and then you're not tired, or do we have time? How do we?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about how your work is. I mean, it's so layered. It has all of this political content and, like you said, power and water and memory, and it's also so much about bridging. And it's so interesting that you have these two very different ways of working that I think must come together too. I mean, they do, right? Because I'm sure that that how your co-learning and the these projects feed into your painting and video and vice versa. It's
And it's
I
also, I think my structure is beauty. I think like that's
mm,
the language that everybody understands.
mm-hmm,
So I don't go through. I mean, I have the political filter. Of course, I'm
mm,
very critical, but also because where I grew up. But the first window for me to enter to any community or any work, it's a beauty, and then I get the chaotic thing out of beauty. So I think it's always like works in balance together, and that's how it made my communication and learning process much easier.
mm,
Yeah. So this is the second component of the project. Because we were talking about how they really like at the Wayfield, the fabulous curator Jennifer McGregor wanted to somehow do something that people, the audience, regular audience of the visitors of the garden, they get to the woodland more, because it's a beautiful trail, but it's just kind of like less people go to that trail because they go to the other part of the gardens that is easier or more visible or like more convenient. So what I did, I just kind of like pointed with the way that you position the installation, and then it goes all the way to, it goes like in a very visible way to that woodland, and it lead people to a gazebo that it was already there. It's a rustic gazebo, and but I made a sound installation there, and I thought actually it's kind of like it complete the whole workshop and everything that we talked about those eight rivers, because we're talking about eight rivers, but in the octagon we don't see anything about those eight rivers in the zines maybe, but who sees the zines, but like then I came up with the idea that the eight rivers, the sound of eight rivers can come to the gazebo. And I really also, another aspect that I've been working on for a decade is the healing aspect of memory healing, the scar of the that is on the history of all of
mm,
us. The scar is on the Hudson because of colonialism, pollution, and everything. So I just put together these sounds, and I worked again with Magic Shable that he found the archive of the actual sound of those rivers from around the world. The rivers are Euphrates, Ganges, Hudson, Karun from Iran, Mississippi, Nile, Rio Grande, and Woori in Cameroon. In another talk, which is longer, we could just talk about like how each of these rivers has or had or has similar difficulties or history with Hudson. And then we get to the point that also these struggles is within the ecosystem, the DNA of the water.
mm,
Um, just one example, Buri in Cameroon,
mm,
it's so known for the really big shrimps that has got. So exactly like the way that the Europeans came to the Hudson and they saw the oyster that is just like shining, the
mm,
same thing Portuguese went to, they entered and they encountered Wuri, and they saw these golden things, they were shrimp, and they called Wuri Wuri, that is
oh,
it
interesting.
means big shrimp. So things like that, that's one very
Yes.
minor example. But so yeah, the sounds are the actual sounds that magic work with them, with the lullabies from the regions, um, not in a very obvious way that I'm
Mm.
expressing now, but in a very beautiful way that he made his own magic on that. So, and then also like it was a lot of talk through with this group of people that if it's QR code, should be a QR code. What about accessibility? Who can just have and kind of like everybody voted for, of course, young generation too, but they decided for QR code. I mean, I proposed QR code, but I didn't want to dictate that because of the accessibility to
Mhm.
internet and who can listen. And but the vote was proved us actually that the project apparently was very successful, according to the garden's employees, that there are many people that they go to gazebo and sit there and just listening to the, and it's like an orchestration. If for example a couple of friends go there and each one puts their phone on the QR code, and then the river, for example, the Ganges starts, and the other one does Mississippi, and the other one Nile. So it's going to be an
That's great.
orchestration of the rivers. That we did like some performances, of course, there and talks and stuff like that. And thank you. I talked a lot. I'm so sorry.
No, thank you so much. I guess Wave Hill's closed right now for coronavirus, I believe, but this is still there.
Uh,
That is still there.
so this got like to the, I mean, it was supposed to be there until um, the beginning of December because of the, of course, because of the weather and because we didn't know how it reacts to the weather.
Okay.
And then in December, I proposed that if they can keep it, because I thought part of the um, project is also to see if it stays, and if not, how it decays. And I they generously accepted, and I also like checked that there is no, I mean checked like very regularly that there is nothing that is the public
Mm.
gets to anything dangerous or something, which
Mhm.
was not completely. And then you get a lot of, oh, I forgot to bring the pictures here, it's such a shame, but it got like buried under snow, and that was totally a different thing there, with the shape of the snow, and then it got to ice, and then it got melted, and the way that it was leaking on the same exact trace that it goes, it was like, it was really I'm so glad that they accepted to stay. And then we were supposed to deinstall it or find a new home for it. So we were in the um, in the beginning of conversation to find a home, another home, which I was ideally thinking of, this has to float. And I calculated everything that this can float actually, with also people or things in it.
Oh wow.
Yes, because I had, it wasn't like initially from the proposal, but I always just think ahead. So I
Yeah.
thought, if that happens, it seems like this has to go to a journey. Even I was thinking, even for 1 hour, this has to go on water. So we started the conversation with a couple of institutions that they are on Hudson,
Mm.
and the COVID happened, the pandemic happened, and the conversation stopped. Then the garden people, I'm talking about like people in the field that they have to take care of grass and
Mm.
everything. So they were suggesting that we have to deinstall it because we don't know how much we wait until the next conversation. So I deinstalled it, and I'm hoping that they might just come up another project or some sort of collaboration or any other opportunity that I can continue this or making it in a different way, that it floats, especially with, as we talked before, about like the sea level rise, and we're talking about like locally and also globally.
Right.
I really like to see it float. Yeah.
Thank you.